the American people have hired us to make them prosperous and to keep them safe.
Reagan was not a divider, he was a uniter. But he was a uniter that didn't back down from his principle of what he believed was the right thing and the right thing to do by the country.
Dennis Quaid worked very hard to be able to imitate, and he does. And you look at it at his mouth, which you wouldn't think is an obvious thing to notice, but it looks like Reagan.
And yet the movie couldn't match the gravitas of the moment in the same way that you see even clips on YouTube when you watch Reagan deliver it. Yeah. You're like, man, there was just something there.
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Howdy.
Hey, guys.
We're excited to bring you our episode today. We went and saw Reagan, the movie, with Dennis Quaid playing Reagan, and we'll let you know what we think and give it a review at the end. So first off, so the movie starts with Reagan as a kid. It kind of goes throughout his life.
Yeah, this seemed to be made as, I guess, a homage to his life. Mm-hmm. And essentially takes him from being a little boy all the way up through the sunset of his life.
Yeah.
One of the areas that I have personally not been as familiar with was his childhood.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, and again, spoiler alert, you should know already if you've listened to the show or watched it, that we're going to spoil the movie.
Right, yeah. But also, it's actual history, so you should probably know that.
You should probably know a lot of this stuff,
yeah.
But what I didn't know was that he had an alcoholic father.
Yeah.
And another thing I didn't know, and I still am not terribly clear on this, but it seems like he called his parents by their first name.
Yeah, that was interesting.
It was interesting.
I've never heard that before. I guess I can Google it real quick.
Yeah, that was interesting. But I really did. I liked how the movie starts out framing from the perspective. There's two different perspectives. Mm-hmm. There's the influence of his life, which is his mother giving him the book, The Printer of Udell.
Yeah.
Or Udell.
That printer of Udell's.
Yeah. And by Harold B. Wright, 1903, I think.
Okay.
Is when it was written. But it, I guess, was called like a dime store novel at its time. But it follows a young man who also has a alcoholic father and who runs away and then ultimately finds Jesus and becomes a Christian.
And it's broadly a story about good triumphing over evil, which is what the movie tells you about it.
And according to the story, that book instantly galvanized his desire to become a Christian, and it really directed his life. And you see it throughout the rest of the movie. The other perspective is that from a KGB agent.
But the KGB knows something.
Yeah.
Which frames up this whole watching Reagan from the outside, watching this crusader as he develops and grows and to ultimately topple the Soviet Union.
Right. So throughout the movie, the KGB agent, played by Jon Voight, who is fairly famously a conservative, is describing his career as a KGB agent, watching Reagan as he rises to prominence. And that's kind of the conceit for the storytelling.
According to, I guess, the logic of the story, the Soviet Union or forces of the empire notice Reagan in his years as the president for SAG, or the Screen Actors Guild, and his McCarthy era crusading, I guess, against the infiltration of communism into Hollywood by way of labor unions and joining labor unions.
Yeah, the way the movie presents it, the goal was to get SAG and every other labor union in the U.S. to merge into one giant labor union, which the USSR could then manipulate. And the way the movie presents it, Reagan was instrumental in keeping SAG from joining this monolithic labor union, I guess.
And as we know, Hollywood is extremely influential. So, and even to this day, you see actors spouting off their political ideas. So,
R.I.P. Mark Hamill's brain.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of ironic that this movie is made effectively outside of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Because about Hollywood.
Because Hollywood wouldn't make this today.
And that's something you and I were talking about when we were looking through the cast list, Thomas.
Yeah.
A lot of these actors are maybe not all of them, but a lot of them are kind of conservative actors who seem to have been blackballed in Hollywood. And so the last time they were really in big movies was 20 years ago. And then suddenly they're like, hey, I'll be in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a result, the cast is an impressive cast.
Yeah, it's a lot of faces. It's not names as well, but faces for sure.
Right.
Speaking of faces that you know, be sure to like and subscribe to see our beautiful faces on YouTube, or listen to our warm voices on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcast, or any place that you listen to podcasts. Make sure to turn on that notification and send us a review, send us a comment. Let us know what you think about the show.
Yes, and visit the Patriot Post shop, which is where we got our beautiful shirts here. These are some of our newest items. This is clearly Trump after the assassination attempt.
Yep.
The fight shirt is what we're calling it. And then you can get such as this whiskey glass here with "We the People" and the text of the Constitution on it. Be sure to, if you want to support us, go there and buy some of our merchandise.
Yeah. We'll include links, and also it's patriotpostshop.com.
Yes, patriotpostshop.com. And there's lots of others, so make sure you go to patriotpostshop.com. Don't get it mixed up.
Yeah, we don't sell stuff for the New England Patriots.
No, yeah.
If you get on a football shop, then it's not us.
Right. But back to the movie. So Reagan's in his Screen Actors Guild era, and we see him speaking before Congress and saying, and the cool thing is for a lot of these speeches, you can actually go on YouTube and find them and watch them with Reagan himself delivering it to compare with the movie where Dennis Quaid is delivering it.
Yeah.
But in his speech before Congress, he says, I don't have a problem with someone believing communist things, being a communist in their ideology. But what I oppose is the Soviet Union manipulating the communists here in the U.S.
I think that's the most American thing ever.
Yeah.
Say you can be a communist in America. You're allowed to have these ideas.
Yeah. And as he says, freedom is strong enough to handle it.
Freedom is strong enough to handle it. Yes. Yeah. I really like that. And isn't that just so true of the genius system that has been put in place? We don't need censorship. We don't need to change the rules. We don't need all of these political movements. I'm getting on my soapbox here.
You don't have to weaponize the legal system against your political opponents?
You don't have to do it.
Wow.
And you ought not to.
Wow. Okay. Maybe someone should tell the current president.
You don't have to censor social media companies from, sharing disinformation, misinformation, or hate speech as if somehow you need to protect people.
From speech you don't like.
Free speech is the best antidote to bad speech.
Yes, it is.
It just is.
So, it keeps going throughout Reagan's life. We see him on his ranch a lot. That's something they really like to return to, show Reagan riding his horse, which is, of course, there's famous pictures of Reagan riding his horses. And it's apparently something he loved to do.
Yeah, and it's in it kind of, he was referenced as being the cowboy.
Yeah.
Kind of this wild westy kind of American.
Yeah, they have Margaret Thatcher call him that.
Yeah, cowboy. They talk about his cowboy politics.
Right.
I think that they shot all of his home scenes on his actual property.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, there were a number of scenes that I could tell were shot green screen. I mean, you can kind of see.
It was a lower budget film.
It definitely was.
Well, it didn't look bad though.
No, it didn't look bad.
And the editing was good. I thought certainly the framing was good. You don't watch this and think this is low budget, but I don't think they spent a ton of money on it.
No, they didn't have the money to, but definitely the shots outside on the ranch, the what did they refer to it? His White House of the West or something. I can't remember what the term was.
In California.
Yeah. Those shots were of the property. They're real property shots. Yeah. So that was cool. But I did notice that you could kind of tell we're moving from green screen to actual, genuine.
Yeah. And going back a little bit in the movie, actually, there's a couple funny moments. It shows Reagan as a young man, as a lifeguard, and they depict him as a hunk, which I guess he probably was. He was a leading man in Hollywood.
Movie star, yeah.
And the narrator is saying Reagan claimed to have saved 77 lives. Whether all of those were legit is somewhat ambiguous, and it shows a girl who's clearly watching him, waiting for him to be free, and then suddenly she starts drowning until Reagan comes and
she had to get saved, and she's so happy that he saved her.
Right, as soon as he's there, she's suddenly not in any distress any longer.
And the elements that they put in the film are all connected to the overall kind of depiction of his motives and character.
Mhm.
You know, he wanted to look out for other people, to save people. And metaphorically speaking, that's what he did as he was the president, looking out for the nation, saving not just the U.S., but the world from the blight of communism and the spread of communism. So, you know, in the story really much is very much of him directing the defeat of the Soviets and the eventual end of the Cold War. Now
that's probably the biggest through
That's
line.
kind of through the whole thing. And I thought that was refreshing in a sense to see, you know, a very kind of like clear vision oriented administration. And of course, obviously any president has multiple things they're dealing with.
Yep.
But that, I think that's this overarching view, I think was true of Reagan. I think he did have this kind of recognition of the evil that was communism and how he felt that it was his job to protect the nation from it. And he did a good job in doing it. Not just protect it, but defeat it.
Yeah. And they have him sitting on his couch at home before he becomes president, having the realization and even verbalizing it that the U.S. has the economy to spend all this money on the arms race and the USSR does not. So all we have to do is keep the pressure up until they bankrupt themselves.
Yeah. And I did think I think there have been times when Reagan has been considered or framed as if he was like a warmonger for like the weapons, the nuke race and all this stuff. But it was clear his motivation was to prevent war, not to cause war.
Yeah.
And he recognized that you had to be, in order for that to be successful, you had to be the stronger party.
Yeah.
It's peace through strength.
Exactly. Yeah. And his tactic with SDI, which was known as Star Wars,
was developed as part of Reagan's Star Wars project,
which was a concept that was being developed, but wasn't, he kind of kept intentionally the Soviets in the dark as to how developed the program was.
And of course, the thing to say now is that it was never real, the Strategic Defense Initiative, because the idea was it was something in space that could shoot down nuclear missiles.
Right. The concept was, and the development of it was, so you can say that it never came to full fruition as at least presented.
Yeah. Yeah. But the Soviets believed in it, which was the important thing.
It's effectively what has been protecting Israel for the last decade or so.
The Iron Dome came out of the SDI. Okay. All right.
So, I mean, you could say proof of concept at least there.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It really shows his fight with communism. Once he finally becomes president, it shows his loss to Gerald Ford in the primary, and then it shows him finally becoming president. And then from then on, it's just dealing with the Soviets almost exclusively. There's a little bit about some of his foibles and some of the criticisms of him, but it's pretty much just a montage of all the criticisms. And then it's him watching all the Soviet leaders die before he gets to meet with them, because there's like 3 in a year or something.
Yeah, it's like, how am I supposed to talk to anybody if they keep dying on me?
Right.
But they keep dying all around me, so.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the framing of, he had this attitude of being an employee of the American people. And there are many different scenes in the movie where he says, the American people have hired us to make them prosperous and to keep them safe.
Yep.
And that is the most important thing, I think, as students of history and as citizens in a nation who are about to elect a new leader. Why are you voting for somebody? It should be for those reasons.
Right. And it has him give the speech that has now become a standard question in every poll before an election. But it was Reagan who actually kind of made this the standard question. He gives the speech in his re-election bid. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier to buy things? Is it easier to, make rent? All those things.
Yeah. It's the kind of question of how are we doing?
Yeah. Which
every political leader in a democratic free democracy should expect, and every citizen should demand.
I want to edit. I think that's actually during his first election bid, not his re-election bid. He says it because he's talking about Jimmy Carter's presidency.
Yeah. I mean, it's always like, how are you doing under under this administration. And the proof is in the pudding, in the sense that when he's going for re-election, he, after his first 4 years, has demonstrated to the American public he's turning around the disaster of what had transpired economically under Carter.
Yeah.
And as a result, you see, I mean, a landslide victory for Reagan. He wins everything but Minnesota?
Yes. Yeah. And some people say Minnesota only went for Mondale because the electors weren't going to let anyone have a better performance than George Washington in his elections. That's the urban legend.
Right. And the thing is, can you imagine in today's world, America in today's world, the way the divide seems to be so divided, any president being able to get,
right.
to get 49 states?
Well, just any president getting New York and Texas and California and Florida, all four of those, it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen.
Right. So how did the quality, I think, that Reagan and the movie does a good job of displaying is Reagan was not a divider. He was a uniter, but he was a uniter that didn't back down from his principle of what he believed was the right thing and the right thing to do by the country. It wasn't just unity for unity's sake.
Yeah.
It was, we need to be united against this specific enemy of us, which is communism.
Yeah. And he's very clear on that.
And he was very clear on it. And I think the movie does a good job of kind of highlighting that element.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes through some of his meetings with Gorbachev once he finally starts taking meetings with the Soviets. And it says, unlike previous presidents, he wasn't the first thing reaching out to the Soviets. He was going to let them simmer for a bit and see what he was going to do and realize, oh, this guy's trouble.
He's a good negotiator.
Right.
Clearly.
Yeah. And it goes through his meetings, and Gorbachev is depicted fairly nicely, I would say. Favorably.
Gorbachev's depicted as a statesman, and I do think that's a fair depiction of him. In fact, I think after the death or near at the funeral of Reagan, Gorbachev's statements regarding Reagan are very positive. So even though you could say Reagan bested him, which he did, in their dealing, because Reagan brought about the collapse of the Soviet Union, or eventually that's what it transpired because of, the immovable force that the Soviet Union smashed up against when it hit Reagan.
Right.
You could say. I think that it's kind of like being defeated by the United States did the Russian people good, or the Soviet Union good.
Yeah.
They might not have felt it immediately because, of course, their economy was collapsing and chaos ensued anytime that kind of devastation, that's devastating. However, they weren't being ruled by a foreign force.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if it had been the other way?
If the Soviet Union had defeated the U.S., oh yeah.
We'd be ruled by a foreign force.
I don't really want to imagine that world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but if you look at even at the end of World War II, the same thing. We defeat Imperial Japan. Now, yes, we have occupying forces there to make sure that they don't rearm and just go at us again. But look at Japan today.
Yeah.
They're self-ruling. The United States isn't controlling them.
Thomas, that is a defining attribute of the United States.
Yeah.
Elon Musk has talked about that not too long ago, in how unprecedented, particularly at the end of World War II, the events were of a mighty nation standing on top and with the opportunity to say, I can have whatever nation I please, and I can just take it right now and not do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even more, like the temptation to crush your enemy that you just fought a long war against, make sure they never rise again. That's got to be pretty strong. But that's not been the history of the U.S. at any time. That's not what the U.S. did against the Confederacy. That's not what the U.S. did against Germany. That's not what the U.S. did against Japan. It's not even what we've done against Russia. And certainly not that we've fought a war against China, but in the 2000s, we were actively trying to grow their economy.
No, because our baseline should be, we believe in the right of individual and individual freedom.
Yeah.
Which is what clearly Reagan believed in. We're not Conan the Barbarian, and we're not, exist just to see the misery of our enemies.
We're not Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not socialists who reject even the notion of the individual mattering.
Yeah. And that is one of the messages of the movie is how much this one individual mattered, but also how much every individual matters.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought getting specifically into the movie, Dennis Quaid.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of his acting portrayal of Reagan?
I think it was I think he did a great job.
There were parts that were very impressive. Like Reagan has certain stereotypical of himself mouth movements and postures, I guess, that Dennis Quaid worked very hard to be able to imitate, and he does. And you look at it at his mouth, which you wouldn't think is an obvious thing to notice, but it looks like Reagan the way he holds his mouth.
He said he talked to his family like that for a year, and they're all like driving him crazy.
Yeah, I bet he did sound. He had the sound pretty well.
Yeah, kind of raising the tenor of his voice.
Yeah, Reagan had any politician that's famous has a sound. We joke about how Trump sounds, and it's not just in the sound; it's actually in the words they use as well.
Yeah.
So,
what I will say is Dennis Quaid is pretty weathered at this point.
Yeah, he's an old dude.
He's approximately the age that Reagan was when he was president. Mm-hmm. I think Reagan looked better as president than Dennis Quaid did in terms of just how vital they look.
It's one of the, I agree with that. It's one of the unusual instances where the actor actually doesn't look as good as the genuine.
Right. Well, but of course Reagan was a leading man in Hollywood himself.
It's true.
So
he
knew what he was doing.
He's tough to beat.
Yeah,
he is. He had, and we were talking about this earlier, but in watching the movie depict these famous speeches, his famous lines from Reagan, from speeches and other moments.
Yeah.
If you know anything about it, you know it's coming. I knew every single one that was coming. And yet the movie couldn't match the gravitas of the moment in the same way that you see even clips on YouTube when you watch Reagan deliver it. You're like, man, there was just something there. I don't know if you could use
Reagan
the word,
was just an incredibly impressive man.
Yeah, I almost want to use the word kind of like magical. It's not that, but there's this aura about how he was able to project strength, project confidence, project command of what he's communicating. I mean, the reason he's known as the great communicator, you can see it when you see him delivering his speeches. He connected with people, not just in ideas, but like emotively. And I guess they say Bill Clinton kind of had some element of that as well. Yeah. I feel your pain. He had that kind of thing where.
Well, I would even go so far. I don't speak well of this man often, but I think Obama had has something similar where he is able, when he's giving his speeches, to deliver them in better than what's on the page, I think.
What I would say with Obama is he had more of this kind of erudite kind of presence, like almost like professorial in how he presented. I think it was one that could be impressive in that sense, but it also at the same time it felt demeaning.
Yeah, that's true. Where Reagan doesn't make you.
Reagan doesn't. Yeah, you don't feel like Reagan is like criticizing his opponents in a way that belittles them, which I felt like Obama did all the time.
Right, and there's a great moment where we see that from Reagan.
Yeah,
in the re-election bid.
Yes.
So I'll just tell the story. In the re-election bid in the movie, and it's a famous story that you've probably heard from history, the moderator asks Reagan, "You are already the oldest president of all time, and people are saying that you retired after your last debate. Do you think if you have to stay up multiple nights like JFK did, that you'll be able to do that kind of thing as the oldest president ever?" And Reagan says, "Yes, absolutely, I'll be able to do it. And I'll tell you further, I'm not going, I can't deliver it as well as he does. He's Reagan.
Yeah.
I'm not going to exploit my opponent's youth and inexperience and make it a political matter," which is a great turnaround.
Yeah, the tides changed for him in the campaign, according to the movie, after that moment.
Yeah.
Along that vein, I really liked the interaction in the movie between him and the speaker.
Tip O'Neill.
Yeah. Right after he had won, and essentially the speaker was talking to him and saying, "Hey, we go 10 rounds," basically saying, "I'm going to take it to you, man.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to play easy." And Reagan's like, "That's all well and good, but after 6 o'clock, we're just two Irishmen drinking a beer together."
Right.
Yeah.
Meaning we can be friends and we may be sworn political rivals, but after the end of the day, we are Americans and we are friends, and we're here for the same purpose, and that's to serve the American people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's sad that spirit is solely lacking in a lot of ways. At least apparently, not just in Washington, but within our general culture, that we can't, and some people pointed out it's more there than it appears because the media tries to exploit the divide. And I think there's truth to that.
But it is difficult when you hear someone
difficult.
express a view that you fundamentally disagree with, not to have that turn into a fight.
Yeah.
Even as just regular people who aren't politicians.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. But Reagan was especially good at that. That's the person to emulate, is Reagan.
Well, the thing to think to the point being, like you said, Tip O'Neill is the Speaker of the House, and I'm not sure that Reagan ever had a Congress that was on his side politically speaking. In other words, a majority Republican for him to work with, and yet he's able to get done what he got done, even working with Democrats.
Yeah,
that's impressive, and that shows you somebody who's got ability to lead in a manner in which they're able to work with the other side and still get good stuff done for the country. And that kind of attitude, it does require compromise.
Yeah. And
compromise for anybody who is non-negotiable is always seen as a dirty word. But the fact is, most things, there are elements of compromise that can be made in order to get something done. If you're never willing to compromise, you're going to end up never getting anything done.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's something that it seems like a lot of people in this election aren't grasping. That sometimes you have to move a little bit towards the middle if you want to accomplish anything at all.
Yeah, that is the game of politics, honestly, right there. Yeah. Trying to get the ball moved in your direction, but being willing to have to.
You got to give something back.
Give some other stuff back. That's how it works.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. Well, so there's a question we always ask about movies that we go see. Is it woke?
Yeah.
No.
No, certainly not.
And I'll say further, sometimes with woke movies, what happens is they leave things out. And so you don't even notice that it's woke because it's just something that's not there. So like
they skip over certain
with the Tolkien movie that came out a few years back, that was a big Hollywood production. There's no mention almost at all of Tolkien's Christianity, which was Catholicism, which was, of course, vital to who Tolkien was. This movie does the opposite. It very much it has Reagan's kind of not quite coming to Jesus moment, but it has his early childhood experiences in the faith. And then throughout his life, it continues to show that he is a believer, which is, it's very nice to see on the big screen. And it's not something that you would get out of a big Hollywood production.
I did notice that some of the cast are Christians or claim to be Christians. I mean, you had Kevin Sorbo, who acts Reagan's pastor, right?
Yep.
And he's kind of been blackballed.
Oh, big time.
Big time. And he's very outspoken conservative.
And he's been outspoken about the fact that he's been blackballed and told he can't work in Hollywood anymore.
Yeah. The lead singer of Creed, he has a brief role where he's singing in the beginning, Scott Stapp. Yeah.
Creed's making a comeback, I've heard.
Yeah, I guess they reunited last year.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, the Rotten Tomatoes score is interesting too.
Yeah, that's true. That is an interesting point.
Mainly because
it's one of the biggest splits of all time.
If not the biggest split.
And it's politics. It's pure politics, I'm going to have to say.
It's like a 78% split between critics and moviegoers.
Yeah. So the critics give it a 21%, which is actually, I think, a little bit higher than it was the other day. And the audiences give it a 98%.
Yeah.
Obviously, some of this is self-selection.
Yeah.
The critics, or the people who become critics, are usually, unsurprisingly, going to be more leftist. And the people who are going to see this movie are almost exclusively already Reagan fans. And I can say that was certainly true of the theater I was in.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, too, I think I said this at the beginning, the fact that this movie is kind of like critical, you could say the message is kind of critical of today's Hollywood, because today's Hollywood has so bought into this leftist worldview that it's going to just by the reference of the evil of socialism and communism, it's probably going to object to that.
Yeah.
So I don't think this was made in Hollywood.
No.
I didn't recognize, what was the studio? I don't recognize the
studio.
It's not
a super recognizable studio.
No. Even though, like we said, it has a bunch of recognizable actors from Hollywood.
Quaid was asked to be in the film in 2018, And then they started filming it in 2020, actually, which he commented was a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
I wonder if that was part of the reason there was seemingly so much green screen.
I didn't notice the green screen. So the distribution, you said production, MJM Entertainment. Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the budget for this?
25 million. So far it's made about 12 million.
Okay.
I suspect because it's only been out since last Thursday. I suspect it'll probably make its budget. I don't think it'll be a smashing success, but
yeah, like because of the politics, you mentioned if you thought this movie was political.
yes. Yeah.
And my take was this is a story about a politician, a Republican politician,
Yeah.
who is rightly credited with, kind of being the driving force to help the U.S. win the Cold War.
Yeah.
And I think that's accurate to history, even though, of course, he didn't do all the things. But Reagan has been one where the left and Democrats have begrudgingly acknowledged his commitment or his contribution to history slowly over time, that he actually was good at this, that he wasn't just some actor playing, all the negative things that were said about him when he was president and then soon after when he was president and all, the negativity that was spun about him. And then as time has gone by, they slowly recognize, okay, he was good about this. He was good about this. He was good with this. And so it's kind of like this, I kind of understand it. Anytime you're in a situation like you could say for conservatives, could we kind of step back and look at Clinton's presidency and say, okay, he was good here. He was good here. He wasn't terrible here, or maybe a better one would be like
Jimmy Carter.
Kennedy.
Except there wasn't a lot good about him.
There wasn't much good with Carter.
Well,
I'm going to say
everyone knows JFK would be a Republican today. So
yeah, well, for the most part, but I know that there are Republicans are still very critical of JFK. But as far as was this movie put out to impact this current election cycle as a message to this current election cycle, I don't think it was, but you guys, I think you might disagree.
Yeah, I definitely, especially because my theater was fairly full. It was a small theater, but it was fairly full. And the scene, there's a couple other scenes that I thought this about, but the scene especially where Reagan is giving his "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago" speech, which he's directing at Jimmy Carter, but it's also very applicable to Joe Biden. I thought that was the focus on it and the editing of that scene. I thought it's basically a political ad by itself, which is it was meant to be in that time. But it is so applicable to Joe Biden in this current race. And frankly, Trump has been compared by many to Reagan. You can dispute that. A lot of people do, but he has been compared that way. I thought, and the reaction in my theater was people murmuring, no, we're not better off today than we were 4 years ago, which is true. I thought that it was not, I don't think the movie was crafted with the idea of we're going to affect the 2024 election, but I do think the release and probably some of the post editing was with that in mind, with thinking there's an election coming up and Joe Biden has ruined the economy.
And if that is the case, then that sort of makes the Facebook argument a little bit more interesting from a few weeks ago when they were saying, hey, you can't run that kind of an ad. And a little aside on running political ads on Facebook, you can run political ads, but you have to go through this rigorous identification where they know everything about you kind of thing. And then you have to have a disclaimer on it and all manner of things, in order to run political ads or ads that may influence or impact an election, which is what the Facebook debacle was with the studio about releasing advertisements for the movie.
But they backed down on that.
They did back down.
So
they did back down.
I mean, I think I understand that you could say that there's elements in which it impacts the current election potentially in that it reminds people of a president who was a very successful president, a president who turned the economy around, a president who made America great, you could say. All those things are true. And so being reminded of that time, that era, you could say it's a campaign commercial sort of for Republicans, I guess, in general, at least. And since Trump is the head of the Republican Party right now, then for Trump. However, I would also pause and say it could be just as much the other way around, and saying some people are like, look at how Trump communicates versus how Reagan communicated. Reagan was much more appealing, and and we know this. We have Republicans that right now will refuse to vote for Trump because they say, look at the guy, he's a clown. The way he talks, he throws people under the bus all the time. He's overbearing and his use of language. He's not careful. He's hyperbolic, all these things. And so you could say, on the other hand, if you're trying to look at it through the political lens, this could be just as damaging in one sense. So that's why I'm kind of like, a political ad should be specifically pointing to a specific candidate run for office. Reagan has been dead now for 20 years?
Yeah, 2003, I think.
Okay. So this is a biopic. He was a politician, but he wasn't only a politician. But yes, it focused mostly on his political life. That's why I kind of say, if this had come out last year, I don't think it obviously wouldn't have been called Facebook wouldn't have done what it did. They wouldn't have said, oh, this is a political ad, we can't let this.
Right.
So I guess my contention is, if it was any other season that wasn't a political year, Facebook would not have even considered, this kind of move.
Well, and that's why I think that's why I was walking, and this was what I was walking out of the theater thinking. This was not, I didn't get influenced to think this. I was walking out of the theater thinking, I think it was targeted specifically to release at this time. I mean, as you said, they started filming in 2020. I'm sure they could have released it sooner. They could have certainly pushed it later, but they released it 2 months before the election. I think not that it was meant to do that, but I think the creators probably thought, happy accident if this leads more people to vote for Trump.
Well, I guess
I don't think there's any chance you're going to watch this movie and be less likely to vote for Trump.
I would spin it the other way around. I think, yes, I could agree with this is the timing is intentional. But think about it in the sense of, this is a movie about a politician. What better time to launch a movie about a politician than in a presidential election year, where you're going to have more people tuned into just politics in general. And hey, this might draw them out to the theaters because remember the good old days when Ronald Reagan was president.
And well, I'll comment on that too, just because one of the questions I've written down is, who do we think will like this movie? If you like Reagan, you'll like this movie.
Yeah.
But
those are the kind of people who are going to go see it.
Yeah. Especially what I noticed in the theater is, being politic about the way I say this, I think there's a very good chance that everyone in the theater besides me voted for Reagan.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, Sterling.
Yeah. And you would say they were boomers.
Certainly. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I would say that was the same for my theater.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes sense in that, who was influential and significant while you were alive is going to have generally more of an appeal toward you than somebody who pre-existed your existence.
Especially such a magnanimous figure.
Yeah.
That Reagan was.
Right.
And if he was alive during a big part of your life, I think, especially if you liked him, it would be really awesome to go and see something about him.
Yeah.
That was another thought I had, was for the few probably younger people that see this might be the most complete look at Reagan they've ever had. It isn't for me, but I'm kind of engaged in this stuff generally. And it's a pretty good look, I think, at his life. The other thing we haven't gotten into much, and we need to be wrapping up, but it shows a lot of his funnier moments. Some of the famous ones after he got shot, wakes up from surgery and he's like, I hope you're all Republicans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, that was right before surgery.
In the movie, it happens right after.
No, they're right. They're putting him under.
About to put him under.
They're put him under, and he
wakes up and says it.
No, he's laying there. He kind of wakes up. They're about to put him under, and he says, "I hope you're all Republicans." And that's when the doctor says, "Mr. President, today we are all Republican." And then they put the mask on.
I'm not going to fight about this.
And I know that's hit the historical record, and I know that's what
I've always heard, but that's not what I saw in the movie when I watched it.
Yeah, that's, if you watch it again and look for it, you'll probably see.
That's what I saw, Thomas. I saw the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, anyhow, it shows his funnier moments, which is the important thing.
And it shows his most, I guess, prolific moments. It does kind of gloss over some other, I think, large aspects of his presidency. And that would be the war on drugs and also the AIDS crisis.
Yeah. The only mention those get is, like I said, there's a montage of the criticisms against him. And that's about the only time you see it. And you can argue about his how successfully he handled those things. But
I think
that's not the
that's not really
main
the
thing
point.
he did when he was a president.
The most thing that I think the thing that was most controversial, what they did hit on was Iran-Contra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, something that could have ended his presidency. It resulted in, there were rumblings about potential impeachment at that point.
Yeah.
So.
And they did dive into that pretty
They
deeply.
did. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say too deeply. They did hit
compared
on
to
it.
the others.
They hit it with about the detail they hit the major events.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
But like it goes through major events pretty quickly. It doesn't linger on any of them too much, except the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
All right. So final question. Out of 10, what would you rate this movie?
I'll give it a 7.
A 7.
It was enjoyable for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd necessarily watch it again.
I'm sure I will at some point. But
I wouldn't resist watching it.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it better. I think it's at least an 8. I think that it's one of it was inspiring and refreshing in a way that I haven't experienced in a long time from a Hollywood movie. Or I know we said it wasn't from Hollywood, but same difference, I guess, in this sense.
Yeah.
It was inspiring, Thomas.
Yeah, where you felt like here was a man who loved this country, and this is the greatest country on earth. And he recognized that reality, and he loved it for it. And he wanted to promote and preserve and promote that against. And he recognized, I think an important thing too, is he recognized that there are enemies of this. It's not just like, oh, some people just don't get America. No, some people hate that that's what America is. And he recognized that. And he was going to go and do everything in his power to fight against that. And I think the movie kind of depicts that in a way that's winsome, not in this kind of like my way, the highway, and we're going to win in the end, dun-dun-dun, but a very winsome guy who recognized that if people really understood what America was about, truly believed in the freedom of the individual and liberty, then they would love America too.
Yeah. I agree with what you said, Thomas. It was nice walking out of a theater feeling like hopeful about America. That's pretty rare these days. I think I didn't think it needed to be over 2 hours, and it was 2 hours and 15 minutes. I think it was just a little bit too long, so I'll give it 7.5. And primarily it's just, I think they could have cut it down some. All right. Well, we've talked about the movie, now you don't have to watch it, but you should anyway.
No, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I think
it's
you'll
worth
enjoy
seeing.
it.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I definitely think our audience will love it. I think
Absolutely.
that's a pretty safe bet.
Hands down.
Yeah. All righty. Well, this has been the Pop Culture Contrarian Podcast with Thomas Sterling and Andrew. We are brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe, both to the Patriot Post and to the Pop Culture Contrarian. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.